From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, welcome into the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende. Riding shotgun, once again, is the great Andre Johnson. But before we start today, be sure to like, share, rate, review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Hit that subscribe button, get the bell notification, all the good stuff that comes along with subscribing to this content. And we have got a great show today. Andre, I am back just minutes ago from Mobile, Alabama. Had a good time. Spent about a day and a half out there for the Senior Bowl. It was a good time, and we had some interesting developments over the last 2 days, watching college guys, talking to some Saints guys. So, yeah, all in all, it was a good trip for me. But first off, happy hump day, happy Wednesday. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Sean. You know, I've been chilling here in New Orleans. Did not have to go to Alabama. I'm glad for you, though. This was a lot more calm than your previous trips over there.
It really was. I was expecting something big to break, something big to happen, and it may still get to that point. There's still a few more days left at the Senior Bowl. I don't usually stay for the game. I just stay for a couple of the practices and come on back home. So we'll see. The Saints still have some big decisions to make, but there was also some pretty good news, I'll say good, newsworthy items to come out of the Senior Bowl week from the Saints' perspective, because we got to talk with Jeff Ireland, who was pretty open about some things. So all in all, it was a pretty informative week. We just didn't have that big blockbuster sort of game-changing news event that we've had in years past the Senior Bowl. And you know what? I'm not mad about that.
Right.
Now, I'm not mad about that at all, because you go through these things, you plan your day kind of goes a certain way, and all of a sudden, poof, the bomb goes off and everything changes, and it just didn't happen this time around. But what are we starting with big picture today?
We are starting with big picture. The Saints, when it comes to drafting, you look at the last few years, Sean, Foskey, Brzee, Peyton Turner, Marcus Davenport, all guys that they've drafted on that defensive line as if they were looking for a specific prototype. And they've been drafting these guys for years, Sean, but it seems like they haven't found exactly what they're looking for yet. Do you think it's time for the Saints to change that prototype and what they're looking for?
Yes, and this was something that when we spoke to Jeff Ireland about it, this certainly came up. It really boils down to, when you look at their history, who they've gotten, who they've obtained, and the production that follows those players, it really boils down to the edge pass rusher position. They haven't really missed as much at defensive tackle, but at the edge pass rusher position, there is no denying that anymore. The Saints need to evolve their thinking when it comes to the draft, specifically at that edge pass rusher position. They have to. You can't swing and miss the way the Saints have at that position specifically in the draft recently, and continue to marry yourself to a prototype that has not produced. It simply has not produced. You mentioned it. Marcus Davenport, Peyton Turner. Who knows what's going to happen with Isaiah Foskey,
right.
a first-round pick, and a second-round pick. That's incredibly high. That's an incredibly high amount of draft capital over multiple years on misses. And when you swing and miss that high in the draft, pretty often recently, we'll talk about some other players a little bit later, that can really hurt the overall growth of the organization. What I liked about what Jeff Ireland talked about in his chat with us was he was open about it. He was open about it because, frankly, he is the guy that sets the prototypes, and very rarely does he go off of it. But he was open to it and open about what they have done and open to the possibility of tweaking it. Remember, all those guys I talked about, Davenport,
right,
Turner, Foskey, all those guys north of 6'5", all north of 260 pounds. They have a type. They have a type that they like, but it ain't working. It is not working, at least not here. I'll have to look at the size and speed and length of all the big-time defensive ends across the league, but if it ain't working here, who cares? The game has evolved too much. Name a quarterback that isn't mobile. Even ones that don't have the mobile quarterback label can still move,
right,
a la Brock Purdy. I mean, they could still go. I mean, Derek Carr can move. I mean, these aren't just stiffs anymore back there. I mean, these guys can all move and extend plays.
You might have maybe 3 or 4 guys, maybe the Jared Goffs, the Matt Staffords, who really aren't looking to run, but everybody else, they can take off. And when you talk about that defensive end position, Sean, they've kind of had the luxury of having a Cam Jordan, but now that clock is really ticking because Cam Jordan, while he can still produce, he mentioned being unhealthy at times last season, but we've seen that maybe his best football is behind him.
Yeah,
he's a lot closer to the end than he is the beginning, and you've been looking for a guy opposite of him really since you actually drafted the guy in Trey Hendrickson and let him walk.
Well, and that's where I wanted to go next because the one you got right, you let walk.
Right.
Now, look, the guy had got a great deal with Cincinnati, but you essentially had an opportunity to pay that guy. You didn't do it. Cincinnati came in with a great offer, but he was coming off of a double-digit sack season. And look, he took a little time to develop. But that's okay.
Right.
That's okay. He was a third-round pick, and he's a monster now. And I'm not sure if I think he's just under 6'5", probably about 6'4". Now, specifically, Ireland used the 6'4" and up in his press conference, but lately it's been these trees, this 6'5", 6'6", 6'7" type guys. But I think the Saints have struggled with this evolution of the game. It's not – people always say the game is changing. No. It's already changed.
Yeah.
It's here. And – to me, it's because they're just not fast enough off the edge to keep up with these guys that can extend plays and gives them problems. So Ireland acknowledged that they could be rethinking their approach there, smaller and quicker, 6'2" or 6'3", in the 235 to 250 range. You got a little taste of that by accident this year when you had to plug in Zach Bond.
Right, and he played really well. And, you mentioned just having quicker guys, and it shows when you look at the games like they played against Tampa Bay when they came here.
Yeah.
Baker ran all through this team.
All through them.
Desmond Ridder had his moments where he ran all over the Saints. Even
Dobbs.
Tyson,
Remember Josh Dobbs?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Josh Dobbs with the leaping touchdown into the corner of the end zone running the ball. Like, mobile quarterbacks, and it's not just this year, for years, mobile quarterbacks have feasted on that Saints defense, and part of the problem is the defensive line problem.
Yeah, and if you have that, and if that is your consistent problem and that is your consistent approach, it's time to change it. And I think that's kind of been the theme that the Saints need to embrace this offseason. They've been saying it. I think Dennis Allen said we need to change some things. Mickey alluded to it. Now Jeff Ireland certainly alluded to it. So that's great if that's where their thinking is, but they have to do it. They have to go through with it. Now, you don't necessarily have to guaranteed pick a smaller guy now. You don't have to.
Right.
But you can't automatically be against the guy just because he's 6'2.5" or 6'3", like you would have been in years past, because your formula for success at that position has failed you. So it was refreshing to hear, hey, we got to tweak our thinking here and consider a new way, possibly. And I know it's hard for guys like that to do because Jeff Ireland is so specific, and he comes from a certain lineage, and it's always stop the run first with these big defensive linemen that can play with some power. But you got to realize what is working and what's not working. And right now, that hasn't been working. So if you got to tweak your approach. And that's really what has to happen at the edge pass rusher position.
That's true. And to give the Saints credit, at the other positions on the team, they've done a pretty good job drafting. When you look at Brzee
absolutely,
obviously necessarily wasn't in the defensive rookie of the year conversation, but he had a solid
really good
year
season,
on the inside. You look at the cornerback position. Alante Taylor finished the season out strong. Paulson Adebo, you did a story the other day about some of the most underpaid,
biggest bang for their buck. Yeah,
he was number one on the list. Paulson Adebo. You bring in a guy like Isaac Yiadom, who, in my opinion, was one of the biggest playmakers on the Saints defense last season. He made a lot of plays out there. There's young talent on this defense that the Saints have brought in. They seem to be getting better slowly at every position, but it's that defensive end that they keep swinging and missing.
That's it, and it's such a premier position. And
right.
It's the position that you got to get it right, or you're gonna keep chasing. And it's some would argue that's the second most important position on the field. The quarterback, and then the guy that gets after the quarterback. So I mean, look at D tackling. Like Brzee, decent. He had a decent season. I think the arrow's pointing up.
Right.
Anyamata was a great find. Rankins was good when he was here. So they've had some success at the D tackle position. They haven't really drafted a whole lot of linebackers, but I think Pete Werner's a stable starter for you.
Caden Ellis was nice.
Caden Ellis was a nice pickup as well. So they've done well at a lot of positions, but when you try year after year, at least in the recent history, to go for a type, and year after year it has missed, and obviously it's time to rethink your approach. And speaking of rethinking their approach, there may be some rethinking when it comes to the other side of the ball along the offensive line.
Absolutely. You mentioned, year after year. Year after year, we've seen the Saints take quarterbacks in the third round, whether we want to talk about Garrett Grayson, you want to talk about Ian Book, you want to talk about Jake Haener, and none of those guys either panned out. In Jake Haener's case, we really haven't seen him on the field outside of preseason. It seems like with these third-round quarterbacks, the Saints are putting a Band-Aid on a growing wound. At what point, you were at the Senior Bowl, you saw Michael Penix, you saw Bo Nix, you saw Michael Pratt. At what point did the Saints really take a serious look at drafting the next face of their franchise at the quarterback position?
Well, I think I've said it all along. I think I wouldn't put it off the table if you're the Saints this year. I don't think they're going to go in that direction just because they have such glaring needs at other positions, and specifically the offensive line, which we'll get to in a second. But it's not going to be off the table, especially if they have a highly graded prospect that comes to them and it's so high on their grades that they have to take that player. I watched Penix and Nix's practice yesterday. Both were solid. I mean, you see the strengths in both guys. I think Penix's natural intermediate accuracy to me is really it really jumps off the tape. And great touch on the passes. Bo Nix is what I call a high-low passer, where really shines in deep balls and kind of the shorter area passes. I think he needs to probably get a little bit better when it comes to the intermediate game. But I think both those guys are going to be first-round picks. I think they're going to be first-round picks. So are you comfortable drafting the best of the next trio of quarterbacks, which is Nix, Penix, and J.J. McCarthy, who obviously was not at the Senior Bowl? But are you comfortable with that? I think that's something they're going to consider. I don't know if it's going to be this year, though. I don't know. But at some point it could happen. I don't know. Like I said, though, if you're the Saints, just because Carr finished strong doesn't mean you have to completely just ignore that position going forward.
Right, and even if you draft a quarterback in the first round, we've seen it before, you don't have to play him initially. Right. Even if you take, say, a Michael Penix, who I'm very high on. I think Michael Penix, after Caleb Williams, might be the best quarterback in this class. You take a Michael Penix, it's okay for him to sit behind Derek Carr. You see these young quarterbacks come in, and a lot of times it's exciting, new face. You want to see him on the field. He could stand to learn from Carr for a year, come in maybe next season.
It's like I said. Now I heard early last year during this past season that they liked both those guys, Penix and Nix. Right. Again, this was somewhat in the gray area of what's going on with Carr before he finished strong. So to be determined, because I think like everything, you can't just completely ignore that. I mean, look, when the Saints had, as much as I hate bringing this up because it makes me laugh because it just. I'm not completely sure. I don't know if I completely buy it, but nonetheless, if you believe the stories and if the former Saints head coach has told this story a lot, they were going to draft Mahomes when they had Drew Brees. So nothing would be off the table if that is indeed true. I have my doubts about that because I feel like he's kind of taking credit for almost drafting the player. Yeah, real convenient when the guy you trade off for everybody, but you didn't trade off for your quarterback. Anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked with that, but nonetheless. I don't think it's off the table, but I don't think it's – if I were betting right now, it's going to be at the line of scrimmage where they draft in the first round. It's just what they do. It's just what they do.
That's true. I agree with you. But about that quarterback position, no matter who you trot out there next year, whether it's a rookie, Derek Carr, the offensive line is going to be key to their success. One thing that Jeff Ireland said over the last few days is that he is not giving – while we're talking about draft picks, he's not giving up on Trevor Penning. Now, Penning last year in 6 games – 21 quarterback pressures given up, and he gave up 4 sacks. Again, in 6 games. That's not good, Sean.
No.
What can you see them doing to salvage another guy who was a first-round draft pick who really hasn't panned out?
Yeah, look, to me, and we those of us that were talking to Ireland, the question was followed up, well, would you be against moving him inside? He said no, he would be fine moving him inside or to the right side. And to me, no brainer. Right. Not sure why they were so against it during the season after they benched him. I mean, look at the way he's built, Trevor Penning. Look at how much more comfortable he is moving forward in the run game, mauling people, and then look how much he struggles when he has to play in reverse and back up, and he's on an island. He wouldn't be on that island inside a guard and pass pro, and he could still stay the mauler. And as you said, if you're the Saints, shouldn't you be willing to try anything to avoid a first-round bust or a first-rounder becoming a bust? And I haven't necessarily labeled Peyton Turner a bust yet, but he's getting really close. We're not... Falsey's not a first rounder. And then look, Davenport didn't work out. He had one good year. Davenport didn't work out. Do you want another first rounder in that category, even if it's not a quote unquote bust? Absolutely not. So if you're the Saints, why wouldn't you be willing to try that? Who knows? I mean, this guy's he's got a little bit of a nastiness in his DNA, which you like up front.
Right. We saw it in training camp.
Exactly. Maybe this could be the secret to unlocking, a beast up front and maybe give your offense a little bit of an edge going forward. To me, I don't see any benefit of just we're gonna keep him at tackle. If you really pay attention to some of from Dennis Allen to Mickey Loomis to now Jeff Ireland, certainly feels like that thinking has evolved a little bit to, well, you know what? Maybe this guy's better fit inside. To me, I don't know what other choice you have. You didn't even have him in when he was the jumbo package that they have. He wasn't even the tackle eligible in that scenario. So I think it's absolutely something they should consider. If not, promote or try to let's get this thing started now with getting him ready to play that guard position, because I think that's where he's going to ultimately set off. Because if you just watch his feet and where he excels, to me, guard would be a no-brainer for Trevor Penning.
Absolutely, and just it seems, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, it seems like the clock is ticking when it comes to the Saints. Over the years, they've brought in a lot of guys who are in their prime, but maybe on the tail end of that prime. And in, say, 2019, 2020, 2021, when this team was consistently making the playoffs, those guys were playing at a high level. We're going into 2024 now. Those guys are closer to the end than they are the beginning. And those guys' play is starting to tail off.
And when that happens, you've got to have the roster restocked with young talent. And then when you miss, specifically on first-round picks, it's such a setback for your franchise. And in a way, it's how did they get to 9 wins last season? When you think about how much they aged and how little they actually got out of their rookie class and first round picks, it really, other than Chris Olave, it really is something to see. And that only is going to get worse if you keep missing like that. So that has to change regardless of position. You've got to get young contributors, steady contributors you can count on right away. I mean, you just have to with this class coming up.
And then you're missing at the same positions. I mentioned it on Monday. 6 of their last 7 first-round picks, Olave being the 7th, were on the offensive or defensive line. If you keep swinging and missing and going back to the same well and swinging and missing, well, guess what? There are other positions that are slowly wearing down. Yeah. You're so busy addressing the trenches. What about the other positions? So it's increasingly putting you in a more difficult position.
Yeah, I mean, it's the natural evolution and the natural just sort of cycle, if you will, of roster building, roster maintenance, and just the daily life of the NFL. You have a core. A core eventually gets older. As that core is getting older, you're drafting young players to replenish that core. And we've seen the core in its prime. We've seen it get a little older now. And now we need that third link, that third piece to come together to restock this roster with some young talent. And they've got a few guys. I don't want to just completely dump on everything, because they've had some hits, especially
in the later rounds.
Yeah, especially. So they've had, and that's probably helped them offset some of the misses up front in the first round.
Right.
But you're gonna need some of those guys to become stars real soon. The only one I could say has star power right now, or at least every day, every week, like you can count on that guy. There's 2 since 2019. It's Eric McCoy and it's really Chris Olave right now. You can honestly look at and say, all right, those 2 guys could be star or close to being a star at some point in their career. And I like Pete Werner too, but it's not. It's right now I think he's more of a steady player than necessarily a star. So.
Right. Now, no matter who they bring in talent-wise, no matter how they develop them, it all starts with having somebody at the top, somebody to lead that offense. And right now, the Saints are still looking for that guy in the offensive coordinator position. A lot of eyes were on Gerard Johnson, the quarterback coach in Houston. He decided to stay with the Texans, which I can't blame him. They've got C.J. Stroud over there. C.J. Stroud, one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. You want to stay with Stroud a little longer, hitch your wagon to that train. I get it. But that is a bit of a blow for the Saints. Where do you kind of see them looking next?
Yeah, mildly concerning there. It was really the first time I was, they were kind of one of those.
Yeah.
Like, are you serious? You going to turn down an OC? Not just here, an OC job. He got interviews everywhere, right? He had a bunch of interviews.
Now, he's never called plays, so this would have been his first opportunity coming here to be able to call plays.
This is a guy that turned down. He's staying with the Texans. Doesn't happen very often in terms of bypassing multiple offensive coordinator opportunities. And here, you're not just offensive coordinator in name only. You're offensive coordinator in you get to run your system. You get to call the plays. It is your show.
Yep.
And he turned that down. At least went back to Houston to stay with C.J. Stroud and Bobby Slowick. Who knows where he was on the list of candidates for the Saints? I know they liked him. They brought him in for a second interview, but you can scratch his name off the list. He's staying in Houston, as we mentioned, with Stroud and Slowick. So, tough blow. Tough blow. I didn't see it going that way, especially when Slowick announced he was coming back. I figured, well, now Johnson can't move up, so he's definitely going to find another job now, go somewhere else now. He's a high candidate in demand, but he's sticking around in Houston. Maybe it goes to show you how much they love working in Houston. So who's that? Who's next? I mean, or who's up? I mean, you got Curry, Ronald Curry,
right.
Brian Greasy, Clint Kubiak, Greg Lewis, Ravens wide receivers coach, Luke Getsy from the Bears is an interesting name, thrown in the mix late a little bit. The Saints aren't the only team still looking, so I'm not ready to panic yet. I would have thought, not just with the Saints, but even other spots, these things would have kind of started to fill up over this week. Maybe it still does in the back end of the week, but at some point, there needs to be some momentum. And interestingly enough, Ireland spoke about grading players while not knowing who the OC is going to be and how he may have to tweak his thinking and this and that just to fit whatever that offensive coordinator wants, because you can't not grade the Senior Bowl when the Senior Bowl is. So you got to get your prospects graded. But he brought up, interesting, smaller offensive linemen, quicker offensive lineman, if that OC prefers it. Now, that is a distinct Shanahan quality.
Right.
Smaller, more agile, moving offensive lineman. When everybody was going big back in the day, they were going small. So maybe that's a small window into the type of coordinator they're looking for. We've already known that they love the Shanahan tree, but are they getting closer and closer to naming a Shanahan guy? Is it Kubiak? Is it Greasy? Or do they stay with what they know in Ronald Curry? And I don't really know much about Luke Getsy. I know his last 2 years with Chicago has been kind of up and down.
That's the most interesting name to me, because when you look at the Bears under Luke Getsy in 2022, they were the number 1 rushing team in the league. In 2023, the number 2 rushing team in the league behind Baltimore. So this is a team that in the 2 years that he's been offensive coordinator, now obviously having a quarterback like Justin Fields helps, but also you've got Khalil Herbert over there, Roshan Johnson over there. It's not like you have necessarily a premier running back, but they have consistently found ways to move the ball on the ground. Here, as of right now, we've got Alvin Kamara. You've got Jamal Williams still around. You've got Kendre Miller, who didn't play very much this year, but when he did, you saw flashes. So a guy like Luke Getsy being able to come in, one thing that'll help Derek Carr is a consistent running game.
Because he can play a play-action game.
Yeah, exactly.
If you got a running game.
Where Derek Carr excels.
Excels in that play-action game. You know, it's just interesting because when you think about the names that who they might consider and the stylistically they would go by, it was really hard to put a label on the style of offense the Bears had, because with Justin Fields, there's so much freelance to his game and so much athleticism to his game. He wasn't nowhere near my radar, Getsy from the Bears. So that is interesting if he's the guy that focuses it on the run game, which certainly would help. Everybody wants a great run game, and I'd be very curious how much of that is because of the kind of off-script type, scramble type plays from Fields versus the true running game, even the design quarterback run game, you can incorporate that as well, as opposed to just broken play a guy runs.
Right.
So, but to be 1-2 last 2 years is certainly something to pay attention to, and it's certainly something that's going to stick out on a resume. I just when the Saints were in search of a coordinator, the guy from the Bears or the Bears OC, just forget the name, just Bears OC didn't jump out to me. So now, and look, apparently it's the second time they've met, so there could be some momentum there as well.
Yeah, so some of these hires confuse. I saw the Panthers offensive coordinator got hired as a passing game coordinator, and they were 32nd in the pass last year. So some of these hires confuse me. But as of that one makes sense. Clint Kubiak makes sense to me, the Niners pass game coordinator.
Yeah.
You see what he's done with Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy. He's called plays before. He got to call plays in Minnesota back in 2021. Now, he only did it for 1 year because when the new coaching regime came in, they cleaned house. They were about an average offense in Minnesota, but he does have at least that experience.
And look, with him, it is straight. He is as closest thing to being a Shanahan without actually being one. That Kubiak family, the Kubiaks and the Shanahans, I mean, they came up with that scheme, or they perfected that scheme back in the mid to late 90s and into the up to 2000s. And it was Gary Kubiak and Mike Shanahan, and now Clint Kubiak is working with Kyle Shanahan. And so if you're going in that direction, there is no guessing. You are going with that high motion, outside zone, stretch boot type system, which I love.
It'll be fun to watch.
Love it. I love that system, but we'll see what happens. It's got to happen soon, though. I mean, I told everyone this week is a big week, and I still think that. But here we are on Wednesday, and it still feels like the net's getting bigger and bigger in terms of interviews to candidates to interview, as opposed to who could the finalists be. I guess we'll figure it out over here in the next couple of days.
Yeah, and you've seen this process more than I have, but seeing that it's taking so long, let's say hypothetically Kubiak is their guy. Typically, he's playing in the Super Bowl.
Right.
So typically those things aren't announced until their season is officially over.
Right.
So the longer this process takes, the more you start thinking, well, maybe their guy is somebody who's playing on Super Bowl Sunday.
And if that's the case, I would have no problem with that. That's the one development of a delay where I would like, because I have no problem with them picking from the Shanahan tree, specifically these two guys, was Kubiak or Greasy, and coming from a Super Bowl. That's the reason for the delay. So be it. So they've kept things relatively in-house, close to the vest, and I don't know. I just we'll see by the end of this week what ends up happening. But I mean, it's searched, and I also think, I know every year there's coaching changes, but there's still two more head coaching. Is it two? No, one more. There's still one more, right?
Yes.
So it took a little while for all the head coaching opportunities to fill up. So they've got to get their staffs. The 3 or 4 or 5 other coordinator jobs that left, openings that opened up this year. There was a high number of coordinator openings this year, higher than normal, it feels like. Yep. So I wonder if that could be playing into the mix as well. But like I said, Saints aren't the only team that don't have an OC yet, so I'm not panicking yet. But I'll be very curious if any movement happens here over the next couple days, or hopefully not weeks, but the next couple days.
Correct.
So, all right, anything else?
One thing that I would say as a final thought, when it comes to the draft and who the Saints would go, what position they would go with, I would say, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, we've seen the Saints have success with late-round picks at a bunch of positions. Cornerback, we've seen it at linebacker. Trey Hendrickson was a third-round pick. We've seen it on offense as well. The one position we have not seen the Saints in recent history have success with, picking in the late rounds or middle rounds, has been quarterback. Do not be afraid to take that leap and maybe pick, if your guy is there, if you're high on Penix, if Bo Nix is your guy, if he's there when the Saints pick in that first round, I think you take that leap and you can find serviceable players in the later round, compared to the contrary of looking for that QB later on and trying to do the same thing that you've been doing over the last few years on that offensive and defensive line.
I can promise you, my friend, this will not be the last time we talk about quarterbacks in this draft, in this class. It's what we do. And I can promise you we were going to dive more into those players and the possibility of where the Saints could land, because information is going to come out and you just never know. So as that happens and the we get into the draft process, we'll talk more and more about not just quarterbacks, but the draft in general. All right, we'll be back on Friday, Andre and myself. So for now, for Andre Johnson, I am Sean Fazende. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you next time on Overtime.